Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dissonant Dialogues. I'm Emily, and I'm here with my co-host Claire. Claire, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. I think overwhelmed with the life of June. We're recording this in the summer,
Mhm.
so musicians, you guys know, summer schedules are just always very weird, and it comes right after a really hectic May, which is crazy for like any human being on the planet. So a little overwhelming, but I love the overwhelming summer schedule too. So love-hate
Some
relationship.
exciting stuff coming up, some exciting performances and things.
Yes, for sure. Today, we have a very special topic prepared for you. This is one that I picked out, but I've also had people from Instagram talk to me about this before and be like, oh my God, can you please do an episode about this? So I'm happy that we're finally going to be able to get into it because Claire and I have a lot of insight working as students finding private teachers, but then also like I've been a teacher myself. So like I've seen like the different sides of the coin. And so we just have a lot of insight of what you want to look for and what you want to avoid. So we're going to kind of dive into a lot of the things that you want to pay attention to, what you want to know before you're looking for a private teacher, during the process, and then how to make that decision. First thing to do before even searching for a private teacher, because when you do look for a private teacher, you want to make sure that your expectations and goals are very clear to yourself, but then that teacher is likely going to ask you what your goals are. You want to be very aware of what is the point of getting private lessons for you. Is this something that you want to do as a hobby? Is music something that you do for fun? Is it something that you want to go for more professionally, or is it something in between? You know, you could be going for orchestra auditions. You could be working on really intense repertoire, like solo works just for fun. Or if you want to land a job someday, if you want to play around with gigs, playing for weddings, all different kinds of gigs. You want to know generally what your goals are, and you want to explain that to your teacher. So it's very clear what you're looking for.
Think it's super important. Obviously when it comes to goals, those are going to be more clear the older you get, but you want to make sure that their background is consistent. If they have, where did they train? Who did they study? Because that's going to reflect on the kind of technique that they impart onto you. And so it's going to be, really important that you research their background and you see where they studied, just sort of make sure that they're aligned. Obviously, that is easier at like a college level and you find more specialized teachers. But yeah, it's going to be incredibly important to sort of try different teachers, particularly if you're newer to music or newer to getting into music more seriously. You're really not going to know until you've tried a few different people. Also, like there's various things like what kind of experience have they had? If you want to be a working professional, do you want a teacher who is a working professional, who is out there in orchestras, in opera, in ensembles, or do you want somebody who's retired? Then there are teachers who have only taught and who have never performed. And so all of those things influence their teaching style and influence what kind of experience that you get. If you get somebody who's working, they might have really current insight into the industry in these days, but that also might mean that you have more missed lessons because they're touring or taking time for performances. So those are all things where it's super valuable because your teacher is going to be the cornerstone of how you build your network. And so who they know and what kind of experience they have is going to be incredibly relevant to your goals going forward.
I think that's a really good point. I've had colleagues say to me over the past few years, oh, looking for a teacher. Well, you don't want somebody that only teaches because they're not doing what your goal is. If your goal is to perform professionally, so how can you trust their information? And then I've had people say, oh, well, you don't want somebody who just performs because that doesn't mean that they know how to teach. And so I've heard it back and
Yeah.
forth, and I'm like, I think there are pros and cons to both. You just have to
Yeah,
figure out
I
what works
agree.
best for you. And just because somebody's solely a teacher does not mean that they have the insight to make
Mhm.
you into the person that you want to be, the musician that you want to be. And just because someone solely performs does not mean that they have picked up on how to teach things along the way. Sometimes it
Exactly.
works out that way, you never know. A question to ask yourself that we would have never asked if it was not for the post-COVID era. Do you want
Mm.
virtual or in-person lessons? Some teachers are pretty strict on this. I've seen ones that are like, you know what, I only teach private lessons virtually because I have other jobs that I do. Makes sense. Some say I don't teach virtually at all and I teach in person because I don't want to be dealing with the technology and the setup. And some are just like, I don't want to have to deal with that. Understandable too. They know their limits. Others do both. But your lesson time slots and like availability for teachers might slightly change. If you want in-person lessons, then you have to be a little bit more adaptable to their schedule because obviously, whether they're driving to you or you're driving to them, whatever you're doing, that has to be accounted for. There are pros and cons to learning virtually and in person. I'm saying this as somebody who has taken virtual and in-person lessons and someone who teaches virtual and in-person lessons. So I've seen both sides of that coin. I would say personally for me, I do some of my best teaching virtually. It is absolutely possible to have a very valuable and insightful lesson virtually. I mean, you want to make sure that you have the right setup, you have the right technology, that the teacher is comfortable teaching virtually. Not everybody has that experience or is just comfortable doing it in general. But if you find a teacher who is able to send you links to everything that you need, that is able to explain things that they want you to do and not just grab your arm and adjust or grab your chair, whatever, and do whatever they're going to do to make sure you're set up and everything is set, it can work out very well. It's a skill that teachers have to be able to teach virtually, is that you have to learn how to explain, not to just grab and fix. And for string players, a big thing of that is learning vibrato. When you get to that point, I've seen it be very difficult for teachers to be able to verbalize how to do vibrato because a lot of us just want to grab the hand and do it. And remember that you don't have to solely do virtual or solely do in person. Sometimes there's flexibility for you to go in occasionally for an in-person lesson. I've done that before, and then just have virtual lessons. And the cool thing about having virtual lessons, I'll say, is that you can study with almost any teacher that you want. It doesn't matter where they are. I have students from all around the United States and a couple students from India and a new student from London. So it's really cool seeing people from different places in the world and how they perceive music and then learning the way that I perceive music and I teach music. It can be a very insightful, cool thing. And you can get all of those things that you get in virtual lessons for in-person lessons too. I think what I've noticed the biggest difference for in-person lessons is yes, your teacher can physically adjust what needs to be moved instead of taking the time to explain it to you. But I would say it's probably something more professionally, like if you're getting ready for an audition and your sound in a space is what matters, then maybe you want to be in person with your teacher to hear exactly how. I mean, you can hear crescendos, decrescendos, like general phrasing and dynamics through Zoom, through FaceTime, but it's a different feeling in person. And so that's one thing that you'll be missing from virtual lessons. But convenience is a really nice part of it, and you do get a lot of things for virtual lessons as well.
Yeah, I agree. And, we've come a long way, obviously, out of necessity. The music world has really had to learn how to do this. Our video conferencing apps by default, when they hear a sustained noise, they cut it off because they think it's background noise. And when you're a musician, that's a problem. There have been all kinds of settings and programs and, synchronizing. And then if you have accompaniment, that's its own battle of figuring it out. As a vocalist, I'm used to having a pianist in all of my lessons. And if I don't have that, what apps and what tools am I going to need? So, okay, personally, as a vocalist, I would say, and maybe this is old fashioned of me, I don't think that you can rely 100% on virtual lessons. And as a disabled person, I struggle to say that because I understand how pivotal it can be to have those options. So I don't think it's something that you need to write off entirely. I think if you are starting, your classical voice journey, it's really important, if you're a teenager and thinking about going into this in college, I would encourage you to really develop your early lessons in person so that people can see things. That's what's a little bit tricky, is that your entire body is your instrument. And oftentimes we kind of wrongly assume that the voice instrument is here, and it's not, it's everything. And unfortunately, in a video call, you can't see your whole body. Sounds are different. There's a lot of stuff that is really hard to pick up on. So, and I don't say that to discourage it altogether, but I would say, it's really important in the beginning to get a solid baseline if you can. And if not, just make sure it's somebody who is really, really experienced. Ask them what kind of setup they have, ask them what programs they use. You don't even have to know all the technological, verbiage and everything, but ask, what issues have you come across in teaching virtually? Ask, how have you overcome stuff? What technology you use? That way you understand if they're just doing this for money, or if they're really committed to making sure that they've invested in the right programs and the right software and everything they need to do in order to help you on your journey. You want to make sure that they're familiar with teaching in person, that you're not their guinea pig, and that they are, like Emily said, incredibly capable of being verbal and descriptive. I like to have a teacher who is able to respectfully, but able to like physically make adjustments. There's certain things like my teacher can't look at me and know if I'm activating my back muscles properly. And so having a teacher who can be like, wait a second, you're not doing that, that's helpful, again, with respect, consent, permission, all of that. So that's why I do think having a trade-off is a little bit more helpful than exclusively one or the other. But I would also say in this day and age, even if you're planning to take mostly in-person lessons, assuming your teacher offers virtual, I would take a virtual as a trial, because you never know what's going to happen. We never know if we'll be in another 2020 at some point, or what limitations will come up. So I think it's good to know what they offer, what the options are. If you're traveling, if you're touring, if you want to check in, if they're traveling or touring, being familiar with the spectrum of their teaching, I think in this day and age is more important than ever.
And the final question I have to ask yourself before asking others questions: you need to know what kind of a teacher you need in terms of who they are. So do you need somebody that has a lot of intensity, somebody who is a bit easier with you, somewhere in between that? If so, where exactly in between? And this is something that you need to identify for yourself first, and then you can assess that during lessons with the teacher and their teaching styles. Personally, for me, I knew that I needed somebody with intensity, but that was also nurturing. And picking my college teacher was, I immediately knew that she was the right one for me because she had that intensity. She was not afraid to be like, okay, here are 17 things you were doing horribly wrong. But she also said it saying, you can do this though. You can get better. You fix these things. You have a bright future. And she said it with such I hope this isn't offensive, grandmotherly wisdom is kind of the vibe that she gave. And motivation and encouragement that, oh my God, I went straight home and was working on everything immediately. And I worked my butt off for 6 months as a trial lesson. And I came right back to her with all of those things fixed. It's very important that your teacher does match what you need, because that's going to impact how you progress, how you feel about yourself as a musician. Those are very important questions you have to ask yourself before you go in for a lesson.
Yeah, definitely. My little anecdote here, and this is more applicable to, being a child and sort of parental views on picking your child's teacher. But when I moved, I had started 1 year of piano lessons when I was 7, and then we moved when I was 8, and I had to find a new teacher in a new city. And I took 2 trial lessons with 2 different teachers. And the first one was incredibly old school, very strict. She was yelling at me. She was sort of doing, not hard, but like little wrist slaps to like get my wrists up and things like that at the piano. And the second one was super nice. And when I walked in, she was like, oh my goodness, you look so nervous, and very nurturing and very kind. And as an 8-year-old, afterwards, when my mom asked me what I thought, I wanted the strict one. I thought she would help me be a better musician. And I was like, oh, well, she's motivating me to do better and work harder. And my mom was like, no, like she had been watching and she was like, I don't like the way she talked to you to this day. And the other teacher was my teacher, and tells the story that like when she saw me, I looked so nervous that she's like, I don't know how your mother brought you in. I wanted her to take you home and put you right to bed. She was like, you just seemed, because I cared a lot, and I guess it shows on my face. And it was very important to me to find somebody who was the right fit. And my mom was shocked. But fortunately, the stricter teacher was pregnant. And so mom sort of made the argument that like, oh, well, she's going to have to take some time off really soon. So you should probably have the other teacher who ended up having a baby not that much later anyway. So, that's another thing to keep in mind, not just where they are in their career, but family. If you're going to expect interruptions, or if that makes them more nurturing, again, all these perspectives are kind of important to keep in mind. But even though I wanted the stricter teacher instinctually as a kid, and there is part of me that's like, would I have been better equipped for some of the cultural aspects of music school had I had a stricter teacher? Would I have even made it that far? Would I have burned out in childhood? I didn't major in piano, but obviously that was a big foundation, particularly since you can't really study voice to like as young as other instruments on a private individual classical basis. That was a big foundation of my musical background. And this teacher ended up being someone who was so in tune with where I was emotionally, who was willing to take unconventional approaches when life got in the way, who helped me pursue composition and found competitions for me and helped me learn arranging, and who took time, as I got older to make sure that I was studying melodic dictation and test me on my intervals and really like work on the ear training once she understood how serious I was. And when I had years where my school was incredibly overwhelming, where I just was not having time to practice, where I was going through a lot emotionally, she really leaned into, meeting me where I was, which was more of the composition, arranging, but also the theory training, which I needed all the help I could get to bolster me for conservatory. So I think that, there are all these qualifications and all these big names out there, but how they make you feel, I think, is so much more important than any music. Resumes are important, their background is important, but how they make you feel about yourself is probably more important than any of that, because you can have a teacher who's had, doesn't necessarily have the flashiest resume, but if they know what they're doing and if they can nurture you, that is so important, because if you lose your spirit, if you burn out, then you're nothing to anyone in the music world. I think that's incredibly important. And also making sure that they understand your learning style. You have a disability, if you have a learning difference, dyslexia or ADHD, autism, any health issues or chronic illnesses, ask them about their experience teaching students who have these various different styles and needs. Ask them, don't just ask them if they know how, ask them for tangible examples. Ask them what students they have with various issues. Obviously, they're not going to go and download personal information about every student they have, but ask them how they learn to do this, and for tangible examples of coming across students who have different learning styles and different needs. And then if you can, see if you can talk to those students, because the music teacher is trying to sell you on a service they offer, and they might have the biggest heart in the world, but nothing is going to be better for you than speaking to students and making sure that if there are students who have various differences, that they have had a positive experience being accommodated.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd like to add to that too, that if you're going to speak to students and you want the truth and as much information, try to do
Yes,
it over the phone or in person, because they are not going to write about anything negative over text or email. I wonder about that with
yes,
people I ask questions to about other teachers, and their text would be like, oh, just wonderful, oh, amazing, oh, this and that. And then I've had people ask me for advice on just certain teachers in general that I've been around, and I want to give them complete honesty. And I'd be like, let's set up a quick phone call. And I want to give you the right information. I want to give you as much as you need to make the best decision for yourself. So keep that in mind for sure.
yes.
Red flags to look for in teachers, which I feel like we've already slightly touched on this, but first thing are fixed statements like you're unteachable. The
Mm.
one that gets me has been said to me, maybe violin is not for you. This was told to me at a very vulnerable time the night before a big performance when my mother had been diagnosed with leukemia just like a month prior. It was just like an intense time in my life, and hearing that was like, oh my God, from someone I totally like respect a lot. So statements like that, you don't want anybody making comments like that to you, because even if like you hear that and you're like, maybe violin isn't for you, but that's crazy. But like, you graduated music school and like this is your thing. So isn't that just silly and you laugh at it? No, it still sits with me. Still to this day, those statements that you think it's just going to roll right off your back, it does not. I already talked about this. Make sure that they are willing to adapt things slightly. I think it's fair to say not all teachers are going to change everything significantly for you. That is totally okay.
Yeah,
Like, For me, well, this is bad to say. I would say I refuse to teach on Sundays. I currently teach two students on Sundays, but during the academic year, I refuse to teach on Sundays because that's when I need to function at my best. So if somebody's like, "Oh, I want lessons from you, but I can only do Sundays," I have to say no. Unfortunately. So, things like that. It's like that does not mean that they're a bad teacher. It's just,
Mhm.
they won't budge on that. I also won't let my students hold their bow incorrectly. That's something I'm not going to budge on. I'm not going to refuse, like, you don't want to practice your scales? Okay, don't practice your scales. I'm not going to. So,
Mhm.
not those kinds of things. You want to make sure that they're willing to teach from many different ways of visual, oral learning, kinesthetic, the way that they can describe things to you, that they can show you.
Mhm.
How to learn third position in etudes and then with like other random strategies and then put it in music that they're doing things from various perspectives, that sort of a thing. And that if a certain teaching style or something that they're doing with you isn't working, that they will adapt things so it does work for you and so you can be the most successful. That is what you want to look for. I will say it is okay to be afraid or nervous in front of a teacher. That is okay. I'm trying to think if there was ever a lesson I went into with any of my teachers in my whole life that I was never nervous. I don't
Mhm.
think so because I think to some degree, if you care about something a lot and you're working really hard, those nerves are going to be there not because of the teacher, but because of how much you care and for yourself.
Exactly.
So, take that as you will. Um, it's okay to be nervous, but it's not okay to be like deathly afraid where you are like throwing up and having panic attacks because you're afraid of an abusive teacher who's making those
Mhm.
blanket statements of you're not teachable, oh, you're doing everything horrible, this is pointless. You don't want somebody like that. So finding that fine
Yeah.
line between the two, I think is usually the best for most people.
I will say it's important to find a teacher that you're comfortable crying in front of, especially in college, because you will, but not one who makes you cry. Everyone else should make you cry. I don't think your private teacher should. I would say if you walk out of a lesson consistently feeling worse about yourself than you walked in, I will say that that was the single most important factor for me in selecting a teacher, was that almost, particularly in conservatory, almost every single aspect of school made me feel worse about myself, and that's not entirely, that's my responsibility to deal with, but it was consistent that there were a lot of days when it was like, okay, am I even good at this? What am I doing here? And it was important to me that my private studio lessons be a place where I always left feeling better or neutral about myself than I walked in, because I wasn't going to get that anywhere else. Another big thing is projection. Do you have a teacher who's projecting their career and their goals onto you in a way that's unhealthy? I have oftentimes been told by people, oh, I think it's best that you study with somebody who has your same voice type. There's no one else who can relate quite as much. And for various people, that may be very true. For me personally, I have had less positive experience working with other mezzos, mainly because of that, because there might be a baseline assumption that our voices are the same because we have the same register. And so because of that, they can see their career outline in you. And sometimes that can cloud their ability to work with you specifically, to see you as an individual. So I would say, it's really important to understand the difference between enthusiasm and bragging. I have a teacher who's incredibly enthusiastic to the point where he can't help it. Like, he will dish about students who are successful. He will dish about himself and his own opportunities, but you can tell it's coming from a very, very genuine place. And that's very different from the teacher who's like, well, my students performed here and I got this opportunity, where it almost feels like more elitist, and sort of a test of like, well, can you keep up? I want them to have high standards. There's nothing wrong with high standards. It's just that that can be paired with kindness and enthusiasm rather than snobbishness. And I think that's a line that, if you have a teacher who has that attitude, you're going to walk out consistently feeling worse about yourself. And again, if you're burnt out, then you're not going to be a musician, period. So you need to make sure that they know how to feed you. I believe there's a spiritual aspect to being a performer. But there is an element to it that is more powerful and that we can't measure with science. And you need somebody who is precise on technique and who demands excellence, But if they leave out nurturing you as a person, then they ignore your artistry. That's where your artistry comes from. So making sure that you feel good about yourself, to me, is where that starts.
Green flags. Let's talk about some positive stuff. So you want to find somebody that you feel comfortable with, that you're comfortable around being in their presence, whether it's in person or virtually connecting online. There are going to be difference in technique and teaching styles between every teacher, but I think it's important to remember that uh, at least most of the time, hopefully, all teachers, right, are qualified to teach. So it doesn't mean that one is necessarily bad if they teach a technique in a different way that's not harmful, but maybe it just works better and they go by that way and another teacher goes by another way. So you're going to find that there are differences in teaching styles, and that's okay. I think somebody who is fun but also serious is very important.
Mhm.
I've had, well, I talk about her all the time. My college violin professor can be so super intense and hyper focused on every detail and very serious, but she'll begin the lessons very lighthearted and soft and gets to know about how you're doing and make sure that like you're very clear on, okay, we're both people, we're both just making music, this is a safe place to get really focused and very serious. And then we can dive into and have those very serious lessons. And then it's almost like we emerge out of the cave afterwards. And I'm like, all right, I've learned what I need to know from that very serious focused time, but I felt safe being in that place because it's also, she's reminded me that she's a fun person. She's a person, right? Because she's showing that side of her. So I think that's important to look for. You want a teacher that listens to what you need, right? And that can accommodate for you. But I think it's important that you also trust them. A friend of mine who started teaching private violin lessons had a student come to her and was like, okay, I'm not sure if you're going to want to teach me because I do things very differently, but here's what I'm looking for to see if we can do this different kind of teaching style. And basically, the student wanted her to teach him once a month for 30 minutes, and she could not prescribe material to him. It was whatever he brought to the lesson, she had to teach.
Mm.
And she was younger at the time and just getting into teaching. So it was kind of like, all right, I need to work with this student. I don't have many options of students to work with, so I'm going to do it. And worked with a student for like a year and a half. And ultimately, the student did not make any progress because they didn't know what they needed to work on and what actually needed to be fixed. And eventually just dropped violin in general. So, what he was trying to do to learn differently and go by his way backfired on him. If you do talk to a teacher and like, I think this is what I need, and a teacher pushes back slightly and says, well, actually, you might want to consider this. Like, I will only teach you if you also do this, this, and this. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It might mean that they care about what you need to be successful. One thing that is a major green flag that I picked up on is how quickly the time goes in lessons. If it's like,
Mm.
oh my God, it's already been an hour and it's time just flew by, that's a positive sign. Think about when you're having the time of life. You're out with your friends and you're in the city and you're having so much fun, and then it's like, wait, what? It's 2 a.m. And it's like, oh, I've been here for 6 hours. What? It's stuff like that. That's
Yeah.
how you should feel in lessons, is that time goes so quickly because you just want more. You want to absorb more information. You're feeling on top of the world. It's that musician lesson high, I guess, that you get. I
Yes.
have experienced lesson lessons before, and I will say, whenever I've had it with a teacher, it's been positive and a good fit for me. You want to make sure that the teacher is realistic and supportive about your goals, kind of like the previous story that I had told. So if you go to your teacher and you're like, okay, I want to solo around the world, and you've never picked up a violin and you're working a full-time job and you have like 5 kids, it's like a teacher should be realistic with you about the likelihood. It's like going to the Olympics. Isn't that like 2%? I should look up that statistics.
Something
There's,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, it's just like the statistics of being a soloist are very, very little. So you do want a teacher that is realistic with you. I'm thankful for all of my teachers that were like, I don't think you should solely go into performance. And I was fortunate. I didn't really care about that because I did want to teach. So it was easy for me to be like, well, yeah, I want to do music education and violin performance as my degree. That was my goal. But yeah, you want a teacher that is going to be realistic with you because that is going to dictate how successful that you are. But also somebody that's supportive about your goals. Maybe you're slightly pushing boundaries of what you think you're capable of. And you're like, you know what? I want to play in
Mhm.
an orchestra and I'm in Suzuki Book 2. Can you get me there? And if a teacher is supportive
Yeah.
about that and cares about you, then that is important.
There's definitely a difference between a teacher who says like, okay, here's what's going to be hard. Here are the obstacles. Here's why most people don't make it versus someone who says, don't even try, like throw up your hands.
Yes.
Like yeah, that's just not worth it. Let them push you. If it doesn't work, then you can adjust your goals as you go.
Hmm. Exactly. Very important is that your teacher shows that they care about you as a person. They should be
Mhm.
invested into who you are. I hate this about myself. I start off all my lessons with my students saying, "How are you?" And I'm trying so hard to change that. I started off with that, and they always say good or fine. And then we go into, like more stuff about, all right, so what'd you do this weekend? What's the best thing that happened to you this week? How is this going? Something totally that I remembered from last week. They're like, oh yeah, my birthday party's this weekend. And then like, how was your birthday party? You want to make sure that your teacher is invested in knowing who you are because that should dictate how you are taught in the lesson as to who you are as a person.
We got to
Being
change how we
in
start the podcast.
Oh my God, I know I say it to you too, don't I? Darn it. And I know not to, and I do it all the time. And I have people say it to me, and every time someone says, how are you to me, I'm like, that's the stupidest question ever. And I'm trying to find a replacement. Listeners, if you know a replacement to that question, oh, I'm in so many like Facebook string teacher groups. I should put that in there and be like, what do you say instead? Like there has to be another
Here,
question.
Emily, tell me something honest.
That's kind of creepy. Well, like, you know what I have to get in this. My replacement question was what is the best thing that's happened to you this week? I'll say to my students, and I've had some
Mm.
students look at me and be like, what? And I'm like, what's the best thing that's happened to you? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, what's the worst thing that happened to you this week? And sometimes they get intrigued by that. And it's getting to know like where you're at in life and what's going on with you. It's
Yeah.
important, not only because I think it does slightly influence the way that teachers will teach you in a positive way, but also it influences how you feel when you're in that power dynamic setting with them as the person with more power. And then my last point is a green flag is if you feel safe asking questions, if you feel comfortable asking questions in the moment of lessons, and then if you also feel comfortable like emailing the question. If you all of a sudden that
Mm.
pops up, you're like, oh gosh, I really am not sure. And I think I need to know this before my next lesson, that you're not like, oh gosh, like, are they going to get upset with me that I'm emailing and asking this question? Are they going to ignore me completely? Like, that's the red flag. So you definitely want to feel safe being able to ask questions. And of course, there's a fine line there. I say with my students, like, you can always email questions and I'll get to you in 24 to 48 hours. If there's like something impending where it's like you need to cancel a lesson last minute, something happens, then they can always text me. So there are some boundaries where I'm like, okay, I might not answer a question immediately, but I will always get to you. I will always get to your question. And that's a very important green flag.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of similar points. Can you ask them a question, and if you don't understand their explanation, will they find another way to explain it? I think that's something that I encountered in every kind of teacher in music is that it's a classical music is a traditional field, and oftentimes people just repeat things that it was the way they were taught and the way they were taught. And in that case, those are only going to make sense to the same kind of people. And if we only teach the same kinds of students, we'll only have one kind of musician. And that's not going to connect with everybody. We owe it to ourselves to be diverse as a musical community. So, if they get stumped, first of all, do you feel safe saying, actually, I don't understand that? Can you clarify? There are people who I have been like, you know what, I absolutely don't feel safe. And I sort of nod and I'm like, yep, totally makes sense. And then I go home and I'm frantically Googling, trying to figure out what they meant. It's a good sign if you feel safe asking for clarification. A really green flag I've had is that I have said something that has made a teacher go, oh, I haven't thought about that before. And I've come back next week and they've been like, well, I did some research. And so, like, not every teacher is going to be an encyclopedia of every single answer to every single question, but are they willing to continue learning? Because to be a teacher, you have to be a good learner and you have to have a lifelong enthusiasm for learning, which, brings me to my next point, which is enthusiasm. Do you see their nerdiness come through? Obviously, you don't want a teacher who goes on so many tangents, you never get anything done. But if you bring up something, what are those niche topics that really turn the light on in their eyes? Talking about Baroque ornamentation, or, talking about this one particular performer, and why you think they were categorized wrong or something like that. Seeing the way that they light up about certain subjects and seeing that enthusiasm, I think, is just a really good indicator that the spark hasn't died, that they're not just in it for the paycheck, that they haven't fallen into a routine where they are not going to be invested in you. You want to see their humanity and their vulnerability. And another thing, particularly for older students, is, are they honest about the state of classical music? Are they aware of the cultural issues? Are they aware of injustices? Are they sticking purely to the canon and the status quo? Or are they aware of Black composers and female composers? Are they also, the classics are the classics for a reason, but are they also aware of modern works and their significance? Are they willing to invest in opportunities for people who don't necessarily get the spotlight all the time? Are they honest about the abuse that happens in these systems? Are they angry about it and vocal about it? And obviously, if you're teaching children, you're probably not going to talk about the next conductor who was found to be, abusing students or employees, but if you're dealing with adults, and there are these news stories that we hear all the time in the classical music world, or there are cultural issues, you want to make sure that they are committed to being on the right side of history, that they are honest, that they're not constantly making excuses for people, and that they are not so stuck in the past that they're inflexible, because that's how our art dies. So I think that that's incredibly important. This example I have kind of goes back into red flags, but I guess you can take it as look for the opposite. My husband, when he was a student, had a teacher who usually got assigned to his voice type. And I went to his junior recital, obviously as his girlfriend, and it was beautiful. But I noticed that while he was singing, his jaw was going sideways. So it was like this. It was really exaggerated. And I was like, okay, well, that's an indicator of jaw tension, which is a killer for any vocalist, but baritones tend to struggle with it. Baritones and tenors tend to really, that's a career killer if you don't address it. And so I brought it up to him afterwards, after I congratulated him and everything. I'm not a jerk. And I was like, hey, did you notice that this was happening with your jaw? I think you need to bring this up with your teacher. He did. And the response he got was, oh, well, you shouldn't do that. And Joe eventually discovered he has severe TMJ. He's had to get Botox for it. He has a lot of pain. He has teeth grinding. He has to wear retainers. Like, it was a major issue that still affects him to this day and causes him a level of chronic pain. And obviously, in the context of being a vocalist, I was like, well, you need to figure out how you address this. And was sort of just being told, okay, well, don't do that. Don't have tension. That's bad, but was never given any practical advice. And so eventually, he went to my teacher after graduation and got real tangible advice and tools, physical gadgets that he could use to help him get over this, and referrals for specialists, medical specialists who could help him. There was a really holistic approach, which, when your body is your instrument, even if you're an instrumentalist, your body is still part of it's what you use to communicate with your instrument. You need somebody who can have a whole body approach. So seeing somebody who doesn't just tell you not to do this, or it doesn't just say, like, explains why things you did are right and why things you did are wrong, and can actually talk you through it, I think is pivotal to finding a high quality educator.
Absolutely. And I like to go over a little bit of how to really get to know your teacher. Also, when you're in like the early stages or just considering having this person officially being your teacher, we talked about asking their current students, for a phone call, not doing things over text or email. I mean, you can, but ultimately phone call is the best way to go if you want to get like the most reliable and honest information. Go to their studio class if they teach studio classes. Now, not every single teacher does offer this. This is actually more of a college thing. So if you're looking for a college teacher, they're more likely to have studio classes that you can attend. If they don't, I don't want to say that that's like a huge red flag. Just not every teacher can do studio classes. If there's a recital that they have going on coming up soon, I would go to that so you can observe their ability, what levels like their students are at. But studio classes are really cool to be able to observe because that's going to show how the teacher teaches, how they teach other
Mhm.
students, and also how the other students are responding to the teacher as they're saying things. That kind of gives a lot about just who they are in lessons. The importance of trial lessons. These are hugely important. Trial lessons are basically like the first lesson or two that you have with your teacher, a possible teacher, I should say, that you're thinking about working with. I personally knew almost instantly if it was or was not a good match for me. So I think trial lessons
Yes.
are very important. I think this is really important to note, some teachers will not charge for trial lessons. Trial lessons, like to some people, mean, oh, it's a free lesson and you get to see like how the teacher is and get to know their ability. I've had other teachers who do charge for private lessons. Personally, I do charge for trial lessons as well, because in my opinion, and I think other teachers' opinions too, it's, well, you're still getting valuable information. You're still taking the teacher's time, taking some of their resources. You're still being well informed. So you're still being charged. I would say that there's no, this is my opinion, I don't think there's a red flag if there's a charge or not for trial lessons. I
No.
think it's just totally up to that person, which I know this can make some people uncomfortable because there are some very, very well-known and wise. And their lesson prices increased over time as they've gained more information and knowledge in life. And so they charge over $100. And I've had people come to
Yeah.
me through Instagram being like, would you even take a lesson that's like this much? And as a trial lesson, and I'm like, I have to say yes
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if I didn't do that with my college violin professor, I would have never gotten with her and learned as much information. And she ultimately was the right teacher for me. I would have never gotten to be with her if I didn't take the expense of that lesson. I ended up having two trial lessons with her over the course of 6 months. I saved up and I had that lesson, and it was the most valuable place I think I've ever put my money before. So yes, definitely, trial lessons are very important, and just expect that you might have to pay to have them.
Yeah, I agree that trial lessons are probably the most important thing, especially before college. But high school too, if you're serious about music, then you really do need to get a feel for people. And something you can do to prepare for trial lessons is get really familiar with your learning style. Because you're only like they can only be as helpful as you can be communicative. So understanding, what your learning style is. Are you more descriptive? Do you want physical depictions of things? Do you like gadgets? My teacher was very big on like always having a physical representation of something. There's a gadget for everything to show you how things work. Do you want anatomical descriptions? Do you want it like more scientific, or are you more, describe things more poetically and that resonates with you more? The more you can communicate about what works for you, the more you will figure out quickly if somebody is a good fit for you. Obviously, observing studio classes is great, but you can also observe lessons. You can definitely, I had quite a few people come in and observe lessons, my lessons, while I was with my teacher in college. So you can see how they teach other people, particularly if you don't have access to a studio class. Being aware of when you take trial lessons, because yeah, it absolutely is not a red flag to be charged for a trial lesson, but sometimes teachers will offer free trial lessons during certain times. Like for example, if it's at college and it is audition week when people are in town visiting and taking trial lessons, sometimes they will offer them for free during that time because it is, open to prospective students. So just, being aware, take as many trial lessons as you can, because you won't know until you have experience with different kinds of people. Take notice of how you feel internally. Make sure you take a few minutes, ask to record. Most teachers like you to record lessons. That way you can look back and you can see like how the communication really was. Because I know for me, it will be a blur afterwards. If I don't record, I'll be like, what just happened? It's so many emotions. Being able to review and sort of put yourself back in that mental position, I think is really, really important. You need to find somebody who helps you like yourself, helps you be honest. It's also really a good idea to work on something challenging, but that you enjoy. Probably audition rep, if you're at the stage where that's something that you have. if you're taking multiple trial lessons to work on the same thing with different teachers so you can compare back and forth how they teach you the same thing, I think is just particularly important. You'll get a wealth of knowledge in that case. You'll be able to have a more fair comparison.
I agree also at least 2 trial lessons with a teacher that you're considering. Because everybody
Yeah.
always says first impressions are super important, but hey, sometimes you're sick, you're not feeling well, you never know. So either maybe
Yes.
your first lesson's like, wasn't the best, but the second one it's like, oh, okay, well, this is them on a different day. Or vice versa. Maybe they're good at wearing
Yes.
their mask in the first lesson, and then you're going to see more insight into them in the second lesson. So seeing them on 2 different days, 2 different times, very important. I want to tell this one story of one of my friends in college because I think it's just a good example of something that can happen in college and something that can just happen when you're looking for a teacher in general. Sometimes in colleges, I shouldn't even say sometimes, this is so common, that there's like one primary teacher and then there are assistants for the teacher. And if you're put with a primary teacher, sometimes they can't always meet with you every single week. So you'll meet with your primary teacher one week and then the assistant the next week, and it'll go back and forth and back and forth. And that's also like really cool. I did that, and I thought it was really cool to be able to get 2 different perspectives and work with 2 people and still see my primary teacher bi-weekly. I'm like, this is a win-win. So it can be a really good thing, but you want to make sure that you know the assistant teacher very well because of this friend story I'm about to tell you. She was placed in her dream studio with her dream teacher. It was like, oh, this is perfect. Met the assistant teacher afterwards for the first time. It was like a virtual meeting, and then they started lessons in person. And she was more so, I think, excited having that primary teacher that she was like, well, whoever the assistant is, it's like, whatever, it'll be fine. I'm just so happy that I'm studying with this person, and didn't really take into account, well, who exactly is this assistant that I'm going to be seeing just as often as the primary teacher. This teacher ended up being pretty much everything: racist, ableist, um, likely homophobic, but has not been absolutely confirmed. Just all of the things, completely nasty. Would yell at her during lessons, send her out of lessons that she'd paid for, threatened her career, lots of crazy, crazy things. And it was not just that way with her. It ended up being like a whole thing with like a lot of this teacher's students that, once students compared notes, they'd like realized, oh, this is like common from this teacher. And really did put a damper in who she is as a musician and how
Mhm.
she perceives music. So I think it's very important to make sure that you are aware that if you are put with an assistant and you're in like a dream studio, you want to make sure that the assistant works with you too. Because a lot of the times, primary teachers, they have several assistants. So if it's not working with
Yeah.
one assistant, go over to the next one.
I
One.
might actually move this around, but I was going to say something I didn't really think about before, but that is a red flag is, do they badmouth other students? You know,
Oh, or other
that's,
teachers.
or
I
other,
think that's
I
a
have
thing
a,
too.
I have a little more empathy for that, because those are peer, but yes, that is probably, and this is something I've struggled with because I've had people who I really love and adore who do this, who are great teachers, but who, if somebody pisses them off, if somebody critiques them, anything like that, then they will go off inappropriately in front of other students. Obviously, teachers are human and they're going to have frustrations. And if you get to know a teacher well enough, you'll probably know who they get along with and who they don't, that'll happen. But if they are, to you, bad mouthing other people, other colleagues, particularly other students, because of that power dynamic there, if they brag about ruining opportunities for, people who they don't get along with, well, I'm going to make sure they never get a job, if they have this kind of attitude. That's something to really take precautions around, because you never know when it could be you. Obviously, sometimes there are people who are just out of line, but it really should never be a teacher's, it's never appropriate for the teacher to bring that to you as a student. Again, you're probably going to pick up on who annoys them a little bit. You'll probably get like a snarky comment or two about a professional colleague. Like, it happens. People gossip, people say things, but if they're really, if they're using derogatory terms, I've known people who have called other students bitches in front of me, before in private lessons, and it just was I'll say not my studio teacher, but other people, it, it's a bad sign. It's a sign of a toxic environment overall. Something that you just really need to be guarded around.
Mm-hmm, for sure. This next section I wanted to talk about for adults that are looking for lessons. I teach quite a bit of adult students, both in the figure skating world and in the music world. And I hear stories like this all the time about the one I'm about to share. And I have some adult students come to me initially fearful that I'm going to treat them the same way that they've been treated before. And I'm always like, oh my goodness, no. But this is such a common story that I'm about to share. You want to make sure that you find a teacher who is about you. If you're a
Mhm.
kid too, but specifically for adult students. Um, one of my skating students came to me um, and told me this story that they used to skate when they were younger. They started skating lessons up again after a couple years off and started working with this one coach that they just had chose and thought everything was going to be fine with and had again, this is why you have several try lessons, had a really great first lesson and was like, oh, I love working with this coach, this is great, the time's flying, I'm learning so much, this is wonderful. And then over time, lessons were canceled last minute, like week after week after week, when the student was at the venue like ready for lessons, and boom,
Mm,
would get a message that their lesson was canceled. um, had lessons where there was no actual like skating. It was just talking the entire lesson. Um, when they wanted to skate and obviously like work on their skills, that'd be like a music lesson where we just talk the whole time and we don't actually like play the instrument, which is like would make sense, right? I mean, there's sometimes that yes, you want to talk, but several lessons that were just like that. Claim that the coach would look very annoyed and disengaged most of the time, but then noticed that when they were working with um, students that were children, those students would be pushed, and that were students like in competition that would be pushed a lot more, would be skating and moving a lot more, and would just be very engaged into those students' lessons, but almost felt like a burden coming to their lesson that they were also paying for. They were just an
yeah.
adult and had goals as well that were being completely ignored. And I should say that all of this was communicated to the teacher. That backfired. And
Mm,
the teacher ultimately cut off lessons. Um, it was like a few months or a few weeks or a few months later. And that's just like kind of how it ended. So just know that if you're an adult student, you matter too. Your goals matter too. You deserve the
yes.
exact same respect as a child who is taking lessons competitively or I don't know, whatever, looking for music school,
Yes.
whatever it is, you deserve the exact same attention and respect, even though you have different goals. So
I completely agree.
yes,
Yeah.
if you're an adult, you have to be careful of this because unfortunately there are a lot of, heck, it's in the skating world, right? There are a lot of teachers anywhere that'll be like, well, you're not as important because I like these goals better. And this makes me as a teacher look better. And they're more concerned about themselves than what your goals are. So being an adult student, be very aware. You might come across this. You might come across the teacher that puts you down and prioritizes the students who are children. And that's just you should be all equal in the eyes of
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
teacher.
It's
Yes.
not even always children, it's like professionals, people
Yeah.
with goals that get them more notoriety. Whereas if you're somebody who wants to take a music class or any kind of class to enrich your personal life, then you're not seen as valuable. And like I say, we are only as rich as our community. And having a diverse body of students with diverse goals, I think, is just as valuable for the teacher as it is for the students. My very, very first voice coach when I was 15 that I started with, she one of the students who was usually taking lessons before me was this woman in her 80s. And she, was not trying to be a professional, was not the world's strongest musician, had a lot of the issues that you get with age, like a lot of wobbliness and everything. And she was usually, she wasn't doing opera arias. She was usually singing hymns and folk songs and stuff like that. And my teacher would talk about how enriching it was to teach this woman who was doing this to improve her life because her life wasn't over in her 80s. She had things she wanted to pursue and she enjoyed learning, and how it was enriching for both of them because it was helping with her memory, it was helping with her skills, helping her to stay sharp. And, there are so many people who are so lonely, there's so many adults who really have forgotten the value of hobbies and think that these like extracurricular activities are exclusively for children with limitless potential. It is okay to do things for fun, and your teachers should be able to support different people's goals. And so I do think that's a good question to ask them too, ask them about what kinds of students they teach besides just, the straight and narrow track, want to be professional soloists or orchestra or opera, soloist members. Like, ask them who else they teach, ask them what kinds of students have surprised them, who they've learned from in ways that they didn't expect, because that diversity in their own experience will just increase the richness of their teaching ability.
Hmm. I totally agree. I think it's the worst thing ever. And I've seen this in the music world and the figure skating world, where a teacher is teaching students back to back and has a bunch of kids in a row and is invested in it and doing it. And then all of a sudden their adult student comes in and they just like, whew, sit back and they're like, all right, I could take a break now,
Oh,
just breather. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, I think it's awful too, as me being an adult now and I've been an adult student as well myself, as I've also been teaching a variety of people. I've seen it in so many places and so many times. And it really is awful. It's important for adults if they're doing it as a hobby, and it's also important for adults if they're doing it to, do some exam to be competitive, to land an orchestra job. Like they're still paying you for their time. And I totally agree
yes.
that, yeah, if you have a wide, diverse body of students that are doing all different things, all different levels, I think that is the most impressive than just having like, oh, this, like all of my students have landed these specific orchestra jobs. I mean, that's exciting too. That's awesome. But I think we should recognize that it is impressive to also be able to teach and succeed in multiple goals for your students.
Right. There's never a negative to learning music for any reason. Like, not having the same goals is not a requirement. Music enriches your life, and that's the point. And if your teacher can't even remember that, that's a big red flag. It shouldn't
Hmm.
just be about the names and the showiest, sort of resume you can build.
Hmm. For sure. And to start to wrap everything up, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how you find a teacher, because it seems like such a simple question. But seriously, when you're like, well, okay, I'm hearing about all these different kinds of teachers and what to look for in one, but how do I search for and contact one? There are several things that you can do. You can simply ask around for music teachers in your area, just by neighbors and friends, ones that teach private lessons from their home. You could communicate directly to music stores or private music like locations around you. There are places that will just have a group of teachers, and you can go there to have lessons if you're looking for private lessons either at your own home, virtual, or going to the teacher's private home. Then that's where you have to ask around a little bit more of like people in your area that take lessons. When you're looking for a teacher, I think it's very important to read their reviews online, or if they don't have reviews, because it's not always common for private teachers, just look up their website and look them up on Google in general. I think it's really important in today's day and age, which has changed over just even the past like few years. You want to make sure that they exist online. Like 20 years
Yeah.
ago, from what I hear, it was like a bad thing if you were on Google, unless you were like an Olympian or something like huge, right? It used to be
I
like a
don't think
bad thing.
my private teachers when I was growing up had websites. Like, that wasn't really a thing.
Right.
And that's less than 20 years ago. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Still, like older teachers of mine that are still teaching,
Yeah.
but older or retired, they're like, oh, yeah, I don't want to be anywhere online. But nowadays, you want to show
Mhm.
that you exist online. You're likely to get more students that way as a teacher. But also, it gives the student more insight, or that's what you want to look for, is to see maybe they have teaching videos of themselves online, they have more credentials. You just get to see in general who they are based on what they put out there. Always trust your gut. I think we talked about this in like every single podcast episode. In any circumstance that you are in, trust your gut. If you do not feel comfortable after, say, like 5 lessons with this teacher you started lessons with, you can always switch. You're not obligated to stay with the teacher. I know some teachers have certain lesson packages where like you pay for a certain number of lessons at a time. That's starting to become a little more common now. But even the way I teach right now, and I think it's still the most common, is that you're paying like by each lesson. and there's no certain commitment. You can either stop lessons completely, you can do a 2 weeks notice thing. That can be more common if like you're getting well along with a teacher and you want to give them a little bit more time to find somebody to fill your spot. Like that's also something that you can do, but you're not obligated to stay with the teacher.
I have the same exact point. Your musical journey is about you and is about no one else. And that applies to anything that you want to learn. There can definitely be controversy around switching teachers, particularly within an academic institution. But I think we need to fight that stigma, because this is you, this is your body, your instrument, your career. And if it's not a good fit, no one else's feelings should matter in that, so don't be afraid to switch, to try out more. This is just, if it's not serving you, this is your money, this is your time, and this is, in my opinion, part of your soul. Don't sacrifice your future to appease someone else's ego. Obviously, that can be easier said than done in certain circumstances. There can be a stigma, but again, if there's something that we can collectively work on smashing, that's one of them. Use your network, particularly as you get older. You're going to have a community. There will be music teachers at your schools, in your neighborhood, Facebook groups and things. Use your community to find out. It's through your local school or your local choir, churches, whatever it might be. That is how you get connected and plugged into your community. Ask the potential teacher's colleagues' opinions. I think summer programs, again, that's not something that is accessible to everyone, but particularly in high school, it is a really cool opportunity to get to work with more teachers than you would typically have exposure to. You can be in different communities in different states and sometimes in different countries under the guidance of mentors that you wouldn't typically have exposure to. And even if those are not candidates for a permanent studio teacher, that expands your network. And then you're going to be able to find more people who know people who know people. And that not only increases your visibility and your access to other teachers, but increases the chances that you're getting authentic feedback when you ask people's opinions on people that you're looking into. You get people with a wide spectrum of experience. It is a small world where at a certain point, everybody knows everybody. First, last, period, paragraph, end of book is, you need to focus on yourself first. Your needs come first. And no matter what people think, if you find a teacher who's right for you, who's respectful, who makes you feel like you are blossoming, that's the most important thing, because your musicianship, little imaginary person who is out there, is important. Whatever it is, whatever your goals are, your musicianship and your journey is important and is valuable. And you deserve to have somebody who nourishes you, takes you seriously. And, you can't contribute to the world if you are burned out, depressed. You just decide, I can't do this because it's too hard. It doesn't have to be. There's a lot we have to overcome in this community. But there is somebody out there for you, and don't be afraid to keep knocking on doors until you find them.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much for listening. If you have any feedback, you can reach us at dissonantdialogues@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 872-216-9032 with feedback. Also, if you'd like to be a guest, if you have any topic ideas or questions, you could reach out. Feel free to give us a follow. We are on Instagram and TikTok as Dissonant Dialogues, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care of yourselves. Bye. Emily, tell me something honest.
Tell me something honest.
That's kind of creepy.
I don't feel like I need Joe's permission for that. We are the same person.
I love how we started with the red flags.
You've got to get them out of the way.
Exactly. I've never done that before. I don't know why I came up with that. And then you, is subordinate the right word?
Yeah.
No. Is it?
No, subordinate, yes.
That is the right word.
Insubordinate is when somebody's talking back to you, but subordinate is just like a person beneath you in a power dynamic.
Yeah, so that.
And so I brought it up to him afterwards. After I congratulated him and everything, I'm not a jerk.
In wise in wisdom and age, if you get what I'm trying to say, they're older. I was slightly getting distracted when you were writing notes in, and I was trying to focus on my side, and I'm
see who they light up can I speak? I think this
instead
is
of pointing in your face and screaming at you, like one of my teachers did, and saying it the same way over and over again.
Who was that? I wouldn't know.